Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. This is one of the most challenging meetups or presentations that I've done. It's going to be a longish presentation, which is unusual for me. I want to make 6 points. I'm here to talk about representing Jungian functions using this, but I want to set the context up. So I'm going to make 6 points. First, I'm going to talk about ideas of Carl Jung, which are much deeper than this idea of cognitive functions, which actually conditions how I think about them. So there are going to be 4 ideas of Carl Jung that we're going to be talking about. That is point number 1. Point number 2, I will go through the basics of the cognitive functions. If you're familiar with MBTI, that will be just a quick refresher, but it is important because different people think about these functions in a different way. What we have to do is that, so it's worth thinking about those things. So that's going to be the basics. Third, I'm going to take one type. I've chosen ENTP, and I'm going to show you how to think about that type using this. Okay, so that's going to be point number 3. Point number 4, I'm going to look at interactions between types. So I'll take the type ENTP and look at its interaction with INFJ, ENFJ, and INTJ using these models. So there'll be these 2 things talking to each other. Okay. Next, I'm going to talk about all 16 types, how you can think about all 16 types using this. And last, I'm going to expand the discussion to a more advanced area, which most of you will not be familiar with, and that is the 8-function model of John Beebe. Okay, so that is the plan. 6 points. Carl Jung's ideas, basics of cognitive functions, ENTP, showing it with one type. Then we are going to talk about interactions between types, followed by looking at all 16 types. And last, we are looking at 8-function model. After I've done with the entire presentation, I'm going to open it up for overall comments that you have about the model. Okay, overall comments and questions. And I'll figure out how to handle it. But keep them general. I will select first the questions which are more general, of more general interest, which will flesh out what I'm saying. Okay, and then we will do a full-fledged Q&A if you want, any comments that you want. So it's going to be step by step. So much material. Please use this advanced technology of pen and paper to keep track of all the thoughts that you have, all the comments, all the questions. Okay, we'll have plenty of time to do that. I'm deliberately doing it in a very methodical way to get everybody on board here. Okay, so in some ways we're starting from the ground, but we are going fairly advanced. The 8-function model is very advanced way of thinking about cognitive functions. All right, so let's get started. Carl Jung. Okay, I love Carl Jung. His deepest idea, I think, is that of the self and a related idea of individuation. We are a whole. We have an integrity to us. We are conscious only of a part of that. And the process of individuation is to move from this fragmented self to a whole self. So that is the idea of self and individuation. That is idea number 1. Idea number 2 is that of conscious and unconscious. The basic idea there is that our consciousness is similar to our sight. If I'm looking that way, what is behind me, I'm not seeing. And you get used to focusing on certain things and you miss out on the rest. So that is a question of, that's the concept of conscious and unconscious. The third idea is that of archetypes. Archetypes is a way of thinking about what is going on in you in terms of almost characters that are interacting with one another. Characters like hero, father, child, jester, all kinds of characters, okay? It's a very powerful way of seeing the dynamics of these functions. And the fourth one is not strictly the idea of Carl Jung, but it is very much in line with his ideas. And that is the idea of namaste, which is saying that the God, this is an Indian idea, and Jung is profoundly influenced by Indian thought. It means the God in me reads the God in you. It is saying the core of a person and core of another person, core of you and core of another person is basically the same. We have the same self. And all the differences that we have kind of are seen in a completely different light when you start with that. So it is related to Carl Rogers' idea of authentic relating, of this genuine connection between human beings, regardless of their differences, okay? So what I'm trying to do in this model is to bring alive the idea of Carl Jung of self, of that of conscious and unconscious, that of archetypes, and that of a genuine respect for each other. And I think this is the best thing that I have found to do that, to understand the cognitive functions of Carl Jung. That was point number one. Okay, now I'm going to go to point number two, which is the basics of cognitive functions. Jung talked about 4 cognitive functions. The first is sensing. Okay, sensing is physical sensing as well as movement. So think of it as you moving physically. This is about taking action, taking the sensory input and directing yourself in physical action. This is about action. Okay. Second is this, what he calls feeling, which is really valuing. It is being passionate about something, about valuing something. Third is what he calls thinking. This is your ability to organize things in your mind, outside of you, both. And last is that of intuition, which is about seeing a vision in all the data that you're seeing and seeing the possibilities. The colors that I'm using are the same colors that Carl Jung uses. Yellow for intuition. Now, again, each of these functions have 2 directions in which they go. One direction is outward and one direction is inward. So the extroverted intuition is yellow. So remember, this is yellow. You can write down if you want. Yellow is intuition. Green is sensing. Red is feeling. And blue is thinking. So coming back to intuition, extroverted intuition is exploratory. It is seeing possibilities. It's full of curiosity, looking at everything that is there in the world and imagining possibilities of what can be. That is extroverted intuition. It is like going out. Introverted intuition is going in. It's taking in all the data and saying, what is the meaning of this? What vision captures all of this? So I look at these functions as breathing in and breathing out. One, you're taking things in, and then you are expressing them. And all the functions are like that. So this is about extroverted intuition and introverted intuition. Let's look at the green, which is about action. Extroverted sensing is about moving in the world. Feeling will have all the questions at the end. Right now, the difference in people's knowledge is very large. So let us go step by step. And we will deal, please keep track of all your questions, and we will deal with all the questions at the end. The green, extroverted sensing, is about moving in the world and manipulating things in the world. Introverted sensing is developing a library of all your experiences and organizing all the concretes in a concrete way. It's having a photographic memory. Again, there is a relationship between these two. Feeling or valuing. Introverted valuing is having personal values that you care about deeply. Many of the artists will have that. You can see it very clearly. They're passionate about things. Extroverted feeling or extroverted valuing is having empathy, is having connectedness, valuing other people, valuing community, valuing committee. That's what extroverted feeling is about. Thinking. Extroverted thinking is about organizing things in the world, across time, across space, across people. A CEO that is planning things is a great example of extroverted thinking. Introverted thinking is turning the organizing to your ideas. It is about being logical. It is about seeing contradictions between things, seeing the implications of things. So you're working on your ideas, your thoughts about the world. So those are the 8 functions. Okay, now this is to get us started. Okay. Now I want to now bring in the 4 ideas of Carl Jung. Okay. Think of this as your heart. This is you. Okay. And you are this 3-dimensional creature, having all these 4 planes. These are all yours. Okay. This is yourself. That includes everything, all these functions. Okay. Now, applying the idea of conscious and unconscious, what happens is that we are usually focused on 1 or 2 functions, or at most 3 functions. So it is like you're taking a snapshot, you're taking a perspective from your heart. You're looking at your heart from here, but you're missing out this entire 3D nature, or the nature itself of yourself. You're identifying yourself with what you can do. What you can do. For example, let's look at now, start looking at a type. Before that, I want to talk about, I'll bring in the archetypes and I'll bring in Namaste at the end. Okay. So let's look at the functions. So I'm going to look at just one of the 16 types here. Okay. I'm going to ignore all the questions for now. I'm just going to have a very detailed presentation which goes in 6 stages. Many people have come in late, so I'm going through 6 stages. I'm about to start the 3rd stage. First, I talked about the 4 ideas of Carl Jung that underlie everything I'm saying, the idea of self/individuation, the idea of conscious and unconscious, idea of archetypes, and idea of genuine regard for other people regardless of their differences. That's point number one that we finished. The second point that we just finished was the basic description of functions. Now we are looking at how to think about an individual personality using the MBTI ideas or Carl Jung's ideas about personality. After which we are going to look at interactions between types. Then we will go to all 16 types. And last, we are going to look at an 8-function model, much more complex than the one I'm presenting first. So don't worry about the 8-function model at this point. You first have to master the 4 functions, okay? That itself is a tremendous thing. So we'll go step by step. Please use pen and paper to keep track of all your questions. After I'm done with my presentation, I'm going to ask people for what they got from the presentation. That's number one. I want an overall view of the presentation and the deepest question that you have. All right. So that's the plan. So let's look at a type. We're going to look at, first, we're going to start by looking at the first function of the type. I strongly recommend not thinking of types as a unit, but functions as a unit. Jung thought about this. Jung had a profound respect for the dynamic nature of human beings. These are not static things. See, there are all these different 4 aspects, actually 8 aspects that shape us. But the way it works is that there are some functions that become our go-to functions. It's called the dominant function. Using archetypes, this is your hero function. This is something that you're very strong at, something you've been doing for a long, long time, something you're very effective at, something you delight in, something that when you do, it gives you energy rather than draining energy. So this is your hero function of this type. And for this type, the hero function is extroverted intuition. So what is extroverted intuition? Extroverted intuition, I'm going to look at this type in detail so that you can see how you can think about a type using this model. Extroverted intuition is exploratory. It is going out and saying, what are the possibilities? So possibilities and exploration are key words to think about this extroverted intuition, okay? And this is the hero function of this type, okay? Now, always read these tetrahedrons from left to right. Now there is a second function. What is the function of the second function? What does it do? It is the guidance function. It is the navigation function. You can think of the archetypes of a parent, a father, a loving father who is guiding. So this is the hero. That's what you're doing most of the time, but it is being guided by this second function. In this case, the second function is introverted thinking. What does that mean? So how does that work? How do these 2 functions work together? The extroverted intuition is going full blast, looking at all the possibilities. And what the introverted thinking is doing is that it is cataloging these. They're looking at logical connections between them. It is looking for contradictions. It is using thinking to organize internally all the exploration. It is critical because without this guidance, you can just go haywire. So this second function is being used to guide. That is the father function. This is the hero. This is the father. For many people, they work with these 2 of their top functions most of the times, especially when people are young and they're still developing their entire self. They work with these 2 functions. This is the function 1, this is the function 2. Actually, when a type is defined, it is just defined by these two functions. This is NE and this is TI. And that's how you get ENTP, just from these two, okay? Now, there is a third function, like this, okay? So you can see that this function is large. It is like 9 here, okay? So even the proportions are represented here. This has about 5, and we'll come to this in a moment because I'm going to turn this so you can see the size of it. Here it is about 3, and then the last one is about 1, okay? So let's talk about this third function. It's called the tertiary function using the archetypes. This is the child function. It is not as well developed as the hero function, but you love it. You love it. You engage in it with delight, but it is not as strong as this one. So it is not fully mature, but you like it. And what happens is that as you grow up, you slowly build this up. And that adds tremendous joy to your life. Development of the third function, right? The hardest to understand is the fourth function. So what we have so far is the hero, the father, and the child. One of the websites uses a beautiful model of the car. This is the driver. Your dominant function is the driver. This is the navigator. And this is a child that is sitting in the back seat. It's delightful to have the child in the back seat, but it's not doing any driving, can't drive yet. Okay. The fourth function is the hardest to understand, and that's called, Bibi calls it the anima. It is something that is exactly opposite of this, and that actually completes you, but you're very weak at it. Something like that. It's a very deep point. A lot of the depth psychology is involved in figuring out how this fourth function works. Okay, so these are the 4 functions for the type ENTP. So this is the extroverted intuition. This is the introverted thinking. This is the extroverted feeling. So it is the camaraderie for other people, the empathy for other people, wanting to create communities. And the last function is SI. SI is about memory, about remembering. So you can see how there is a tension between this function and this function. If you're going 100 miles an hour exploring the next big thing, you can't at the same time be remembering everything that you have encountered. So there is this tension. There are these axes that are there in Jungian functions, okay? So this is ENTP, all right? So this completes my third point. All right, next, I want to show you how interaction between 2 of these work. So we have talked about ENTP in detail, okay? So I'm going to take 3 different types and talk about the interaction between ENTP and this type. Remember, this is just an example. There are 16 of these types. And so there is all these permutations of interactions between them. But I just want to show you how this model can be used to think about interaction. So the next one I'm going to do is INFJ. Okay, INFJ, first function is introverted intuition. Okay, the ENTP had extroverted intuition. INFJ has introverted intuition. The second function is extroverted feeling. Remember, for the ENTP, the extroverted feeling was in the child position. Here, the extroverted feeling is in the father position. What does that mean? That it is actually guiding their introverted intuition. So their introverted intuition is the hero function being guided by the extroverted feeling. The next function is TI, or introverted thinking. Remember, for ENTP, it was in the father position. Now this one is in the child position. And the last function is SE. Okay, so now how do these two people, what happens when these two people interact with one another? Okay, now just, I got very interested in MBTI a while ago, and I do meetups. I used to do meetups in person. Now I do meetups online since COVID, but I do meetups in New York City. And I had, one of the largest, most thriving meetup. So when I discovered MBTI, I started doing experiments. So I would do MBTI meetups. We would have about close to 60 to 80 people show up. People who have already taken the test, people who have already identified, what they are. Again, I want to say all the tests and everything, all of this is approximate. It's very difficult to get. So that's a point I want to make. I'll make shortly. But what I did was that I would divide everybody into 4 different groups, and there would be discussion to see how these various functions interact. And then I would have people talk about it. So I have some amount of data, not too much. I did maybe about, so 60 to 80 people. I did this for about 6 months. So about, 25 into 60, that many people kind of came and spent about 2 to 3 hours talking about these things. Okay. And I would certainly recommend talking to people, because it's crucial to get the data of seeing how these things work. So how do these two beings interact with one another? Okay. So one thing that I have found, for me, both extroverted intuition and introverted intuition is very strong. And I see them mostly as like a brother function. It's like breathing in and breathing out. There is a tussle between them, like there is rivalry between brothers, but you know that you need both of them to work really, really well. Together, we can do a lot more. So ENTP, I'll just talk about my interaction with some INFJs. So I would say that the fact that they too have the dominant intuition, though it is introverted, because I see the extroverted intuition and introverted intuition as breathing in and breathing out, it's a complementary process. I found that most INFJs also are very curious people, looking for many things. So at the hero function, there is a lot of commonality with a little bit of tussle of the orientation. INFJs want to arrive at a vision faster, and the ENTPs are far more adventurous in looking at more possibilities, but both value both of breathing in and breathing out. The second one, it's really interesting. You can see that the order in the second and third function is reversed. And that's very interesting phenomenon, because what happens is that it's like your child admiring the guidance. So for example, the child here of the FE function of the ENTP admiring the reliable guidance that FE provides to this other type. So there is a lot to learn, because you really like this function and you're seeing it operative in another person far more effectively. So that, and vice versa, it is with the TI. So the TI of this is the guidance function, and TI here is the child function. So that there is admiration that comes from that. And the green function is the weakest for both of them. So there is a common weakness over there, something like that. So that would be the way in which, this is a general pattern of interaction. I will take one more. Let's see which one I would take. I'll take, let me see. Let me just leave it at one example. And then in the part of, because, when I'm describing things, I want to take time to describe each of the type. You have to understand each type on its own terms, like INFJ. And then you say, okay, how will they interact? Okay, and you need to base this on actually encountering many people and figuring out how these things actually work. Okay, so I'm going to keep the second section, the fourth section at that. So now I want to show you something. So I just want to say that there are eight. Okay, you know what? I want to make one point here. You look at this. So I'll make one point before I go on. You look at this. This is yellow, blue, red, and green, right? Talked about ENTP. But another type, there is another type which has the exact same colors, but opposite orientation, and that is INTJ. So this is NI for them. This is TE for them. This is FI. And this is SE. So there is a very interesting dynamic between this INTJ and ENTP, because the functions are the same, but the orientation is different. So that's something that I'll bring up when we talk about the 8 types. So I really like this. I'm not going to do this for everything here, but let me just show you this as a visual, and then we will go to the next one. Okay. So here are the 8 types. Okay. I have not made all of them right now, but you can do it yourself. Okay. So you can take all. So these are the 8 of these tetrahedrons. And remember that each of the tetrahedron represents 2 of the types. So you can actually make these things and try to think in a concrete way about the interactions between them, about their own nature. So I recommend that. So I recommend having 8 of these so you can work on all types together. Let me go ahead and bring this back. All right. So let me, now that I've gone through everything, I want to go back and touch upon the 4 points, the 4 principles of Carl Jung, and show how it relates here. So first principle is that of the self. You have to realize that you have all these functions, okay? I think I'm not going to present on the 8 function model. I've done a separate video on 8 function model. That's an advanced topic. I just want to tell you that, let me show you actually. I'll just show you one thing, and then we will go to comments. So let's do this again, okay? So the way in which 8 functions work is like this, right? So this is ENTP that we looked at. So these are 4 functions, but Carl Jung has 8 functions. So what about the other functions? Okay, these are like shadow. BP calls it the shadow functions. These are the functions that are there in conscious, are more conscious. These functions are operative, but are more unconscious. And there is a dynamic between all these 8 functions. So for example, BB talks about the first function as the hero function. This function here, which is this one, for example, is NE, extroverted intuition. It regards introverted intuition as the opposing function. I call it the brother function. You know, it's really useful to think of this as a family, because family has a certain unity to it, certain, not just unity, but it has an integrity to it. It is one family. And each part of the family, each member of the family plays a role. So you can think of yourself as this with just 4 functions. But if you want to go deeper, you look at the other 8 functions and how they are working. So quickly, BB regards the 5th function, which is this yellow here, as the opposing function. The 6th function, which is the equivalent of the father function here, as the Senex function. It's the critiquing parent who's saying, so for example, this parent is saying, is TI, saying to the extroverted intuition, go ahead, do things. I'm going to organize it for you. I'm going to help you organize it. This one, TE, is saying, what are you doing? You're wasting your time looking at all these possibilities. Just get down and build something now. So there is a tension between, so there is this is called, BB calls it the Senex. By the way, there is a fantastic presentation on BB's ideas on our YouTube channel by Richard Owen. He's a student of BB, and John BB himself participates in the Q&A and the comments. And then John BB does a full meetup with us on these 8 functions. So I'm just touching on them to show you, to relate it back to the 4 big ideas of Carl Jung. So you do not take this in a simplistic way. The function over here is the Senex. Remember the function, the 3rd function here was the child function. The equivalent of that here is the trickster. This child you love. It's a good child, okay? Gives you a lot of delight. Trickster always gets you into trouble, okay? So that's and the last function he calls a demon. Again, the 4th and the 8th function are very difficult to talk about, and I'm not going to try doing that. I don't understand them that well, so I'm not going to try to do that. So that is a very quick look at the 8 function. I've just rattled through it. Now I want to circle back to the first point, and that is Carl Jung's ideas. You have to realize that yourself is all of this. This is conscious, but realize if you look at yourself, and most people look at themselves mostly like this, sometimes just like this, sometimes like this, sometimes like this, sometimes like this, but they don't get the other shadow functions, and they don't get this 3-dimensionality of it. See, applying the idea of conscious, what you're looking at here is conscious. This is conscious. But you see, there is all of this stuff behind that you are not looking at. It exists, and it actually supports your life. It supports your life in multiple ways through interaction with other people and things that are unconscious. So do not be focused just on this. So that's the point about conscious and unconscious and the value of the self. Archetypes is a really powerful way of understanding it. You can see the dynamics between this. It's a very powerful idea. And the Namaste principle is to realize that where you are strong, there are people who are, where you are strong, there are other people who are weak at that, and where you are weak, there are people who are strong at that. So working together in various configurations here is a way to maintain your self and your life, because you need all of that. Last thing I want to say is that yourself your being has a grandeur that cannot be captured by anything. There is a concept of territory and map. Your own nature and the nature of the other person that you're looking at has grandeur, has a depth. What these are, at their best, are maps and can only be used as a maps. You can never lose sight of the territory. That's where the grandeur is. And that's where the self is. And this is something that Jung spent his entire life on, right? So that is my introduction to this tetrahedral model. I like to call it the tetrahedral heart model, something that is at the core of you and something that is three-dimensional. It reminds you of the three-dimensionality so that you do not focus just on one part of it. Now, I want to invite people to firstly tell me what they thought of this presentation, what they got from it, and ask any questions that you have. Try to be brief, try to be concise. I want to hear from many people, and then I will elaborate on everything that I've said based on your comments and your questions. So go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to ask any questions. Okay, and try to be concise. Let's start with Tanya. Tanya, what did you think of this presentation? And do you have a question?
Yes, I think the presentation really covered, I want to say, the basic fundamental understanding of cognitive functions and, well, all 8 of them pretty much. I guess my question would be along the lines of how parts of the unconscious could develop over time. And I know you've mentioned that, you know, beginning in life, you would be more
Wonderful.
geared towards
Great
like
question. I'm going to deal with that. Okay. Great question of how does unconscious things develop? Excellent. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, that's a fantastic presentation, as always. You know, I think that what this does is it takes Bucky's concepts and actually applies them to the real world and shows the power of them, the integrity of them. One thing I was thinking about is as far as the integrated self, maybe being 2 interlocked tetrahedron as well. And that could maybe capture all 8 functions, like a Merkaba would be a very interesting way of actually depicting all 8 functions. So that's just one thought.
No, it's absolutely true. I mean, that's how I think of it as well. So it's like you have, you know, these 2, right? You have the first 4 functions. These are the first 4 functions. And you have the next 4 functions. And they're kind of locked together. So the result is actually these 2 things together. So absolutely great point.
Just one other thing, I just think that it also it calls into like it shows you the whole on so many different levels, just outside of these functions as well. Just that's one side note I just want to say from a systems thinking perspective.
Yeah, excellent. And you know, like this is the Merkaba. This is basically 2 different tetrahedrons. I don't know whether you can see it properly or not, but these are 2 different tetrahedrons. You can see 2 different tetrahedrons like that. So that there are many kind of geometrical things. The beautiful thing about the tetrahedron is that it is the simplest of the 3D structures, and it actually can result in many different combinations, which are very fascinating. And this is what I learned from Bucky, that the idea of using a tetrahedron, you know, comes from Bucky. I already had the functions, you know, thanks to Carl Jung. But what Bucky does is that by moving things to 3D, he shows a way of integrating. Now, it's not him who's doing it. It's just that the world is 3D. It's not 2D. All my maps before were 2D maps, and moving to the moving to this is a big giant step. So thank you. Next up is Brian and Penny.
No, I thought it was a great, very good presentation and very logical, and really explained a lot. I liked the 3D model. It's much better than the flat ones. But I was wondering, on the tetrahedron, like you're looking at the dominant kind of sides, but then you said people forget the other sides. Are the other sides like the unconscious or?
Yes, exactly. Those are unconscious, because what happens is that when you focus on one thing, like for example, when you're thinking logically, step by step, you're not feeling at the same time, because that's going to distract you. You have to kind of move to that separately. When you're doing that, you're not thinking in a step-by-step fashion. So there is this back and forth that happens naturally. There is this tension. These functions are like at the opposite end of axes. So if you're focused on one end of the axis, the other end is ignored. It's similar to how our eyes work. When you're looking one way, you're not looking at the other way. Wonderful, thank you. Let's see. Next up is going to be Fei Wu Ling. Fei Wu Ling, go ahead.
Hello, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. So my question has been typed in. I'm an ENFP, but because of my spiritual awakening, I think I also got NI. I can kind of predict future events, etc. In addition to seeing possibilities. And is it because of this reason, the mainstream, because functions can be transcended?
Sure.
That's why the mainstream psychology doesn't admit the validity of cognitive functions. For example, Jordan Peterson appears to be a STJ to me, but he's quite visionary in many ways.
Wonderful, great questions. Both you and Tanya are asking questions which are quite advanced, and I will take both of these questions. A question about how do unconscious functions develop over time, and how do you transcend functions? So I will go ahead and deal with that. So let me hear everybody's take on the presentation itself and take some basic questions, and then we will go to these questions, okay? Next up is Jen. Jen, go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, quite fascinating. This is great. Actually, I'm ENTP, so I'm very glad to hear all this. And my question actually is, how do you think this works for the partnership, like couples? What's usually, I noticed there's always opposite, but there have to be something in common as well. So it's like the dominant common or the
Sure.
common.
Excellent question. And what we'll do is that any question which is of more general interest, I'll take first. I'm not losing any of the questions. I'm going to keep taking some of the questions to flesh out things. And then we will take more questions, okay? So what I want to give you an example of is two of my friends who are very good friends, and they are also business partners, okay? And I was talking to them. They're not very familiar with MBTI, and we were going through it very, very quickly. So one of them, their dominant function is blue, that is thinking, okay? It is mostly introverted thinking, okay? Very, very careful thinker. Their second function, guidance function, is NE, of seeing possibilities. Okay. Their next function is SI, and their last function is feeling. Okay. Now their friend, their first function is feeling, FI. Okay. Their second function is NE. Okay. Their third function is SI, and their last function is this. Okay. Now, how does this partnership work? The partnership works very well. They're really great friends and great business partners because they have the same, the way in which they work is that both of them are really committed to this second part and the third part, which is the same for them. So they are all about exploring all the possibilities. The way, and that's their guidance mechanism, but the way they do that is different. Like one of them is able to kind of have a personal value of saying, this is really important. Of the things we are exploring, this is really important. And this person, he says, yes, and let me work this out in great amount of detail to make sure that we've gotten it. And both of them are actually using this with similar delight. So that's an example of the functions. Now, the way in which these functions interact can be very different, but the principle is that there has to be something in common, or you need to have a larger view of human beings and being able to see the value of something, even though you do not have much of it. You need to see the value of it in life. So that's the best way I can answer it as an example. All right, let's take the next question. So I would love, any comments about the presentation as such, and you can put any question on the table. Let's go with Madhav.
This was really informative. I knew about the analogy of the passengers in the car, but I wasn't aware of the opposite, where there's a critical parent, the trickster, the demon. So that's something I want to look into. My question is, are the colors of any significance, or is it just random?
Okay, that's a great question. Now, this is a very deep point. What happens is that, there is this correspondence between colors and sounds and thoughts. There is a very famous experiment called the Kiki Booba experiment. So people are shown two shapes. One of them is spiky shape, and one of them is like a cloudy shape. And people are asked, what is Kiki and what is Booba? And 95% of people point to Kiki as being the sharp one and Booba as being the soft one. Similarly, when the color is orange and like mauve or really pale purple, they identify the pale purple with Booba and bright orange with Kiki. So there is a correspondence between colors and what we think. There is like the dependability of organization. That's why most police have blue. Red is traditionally the color of the heart. This is the color of like earth. This is the color of light, which is about insight. So there is a deep correspondence between colors and these functions, which is what Carl Jung uses. And I find it very useful. It actually speaks to me very quickly. So you just look at this and you can see where you are. So that's what I would say. All right. Let's see. Anybody else? I think somebody else had Anybody wants to ask any questions? We'll go with Brian. Comments or questions? Go ahead.
Well, first of all, this is just an amazing presentation. I think one of my archetypes is lazy, and I've just been enjoying soaking this in. I think I'm beginning to understand Carl Jung without much effort, and I thank you for that. The one thing I missed is the shadow. I think I missed the shadow side of the hero. The child's the trickster, the guiding parent, the senex. What's the shadow of the hero?
John Beebe calls it the opposing character. I think of it mostly as a brother who has there is a brother rivalry between them. That's how I think about it. But John Beebe thinks of it as an opposing character.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Now I'm going to take the questions that Fibuling asked and the question that Tanya asked. But if you have any more questions, you can go ahead and keep asking the questions. Let me see how we're doing on time. We're fine. Okay. So how do unconscious functions develop? So this is again a very big question in this work. And the way in which Carl Jung thinks about it is that, let's see here, a second. Okay, so let's go back to this type. What happens is that for most ENTPs, initially it would be any would be the dominant thing along with this. So these two functions actually carry you forward in a very big way for a long time. So maybe 20, 25, something like that. As you grow older, the third function comes into view. Now, all of this is very approximate. There are, this time frame, etc., varies quite a bit. It really requires work of being focused on oneself, of being honest about your strengths and weaknesses. And then this kind of develops last. So there is a order of development in the first four functions. The integration with the rest of the four functions is even more complicated. My personal experience is that the fifth function kind of goes very naturally between, you go very naturally between, let me see here. You go naturally between the hero function and what I call the brother function. So that is actually fairly well developed. One thing that I recommend is there is a test called Keys to Cognition. Keys, the number 2, cognition.com. If somebody could put it in the chat, I would appreciate that. What that does is that actually gives you not just the final 4-letter word, but it gives you the strength of all your functions. And what I found is that is different from person to person. I've met a lot of people who are ENTPs, or a lot of people who are INFJs, and I've had like maybe 50 of them take the test, and you see that the pattern is very different. So there is a lot of this is individualized. I also want to say that really it is important to keep in mind what is possible to us. So you look at somebody like Leonardo da Vinci, or you look at somebody like Buckminster Fuller. So let's take Buckminster Fuller. So Buckminster Fuller is like this. Okay, the intuition is driving it, but it is the intuition which is introverted intuition. He has visions. He sees what is possible very deeply. This is my best understanding of him. The next function is TE, which is actually planning out in the world. So NI, TE, And then he's very passionate about his values. And then he creates something in the world. But you will notice that what he creates in the world, which is the last thing, is incredibly beautiful. So somebody like Louis Sullivan, who is another architect, he is also intuitive. He has very deep intuitions, but those are guided by feeling first, then thinking, and then this. But again, you look at the last result of what he's doing, and it's spectacular. So people like Leonardo da Vinci, people like Louis Sullivan or Buckminster Fuller, they work on themselves. They interface with the world. They take in the world the way in which Louis Sullivan talks about it. He says, the life began to break in upon me, and a continuous breaking in from outside and breaking out from inside was to shape my destiny. Okay, that view of the self, that view of the universe makes possible making conscious of that what is unconscious and transcending, because transcending means bringing all these things together. When you actually have a functioning heart, that is more than any 1 or 2 or 3 or even 4 snapshots of it. You have the real thing. And that is far, far more powerful. And that is what these people have done with themselves. So that is what is possible. So that's what I would say about functions being made conscious and about transcending of functions. Okay, so now I'm opening up for any comments of any general kind. Again, try to keep it concise because I want to have, many voices heard. What do you guys think? Any comments, any questions at this point?
Another question you haven't commented on is about partnership.
Yes. So partnership, I gave the example of the 2 business partners that the friends of mine. So the basic idea is that there has to be enough respect. Like I showed you, for example, like INFJ. Let me go back. So this is INFJ and this is ENTP, right? So there is this almost like brotherly interaction between the NI and NE. Both are focused on intuition. That provides the commonality. The fact that there is this reversal of the child and the parent, the thing that people really value, like the child, is much stronger as a guidance mechanism in the other person that provides a bond, that's other additional bond, and vice versa. So these are some of the, so that was one example I gave of partnership. The second partnership was in the context of the 2 people who had the second function in common, which was the glue that made possible their interaction, though their first function was very different from each other. Now, this is just a very quick answer. You can go type by type, and the interaction is going to be very different. And what happens is that as you interact with more people, become more familiar with more people, you learn this idea of namaste, that though the person is very different from you, you learn that that is a core, what the functions that they are strong at are part of human experience, human being, and they are part of you. those functions. So it is kind of acknowledgement of self, acknowledgement of that holistic nature of yourself and of the other people is the most powerful way of learning. Another way of thinking about it is Ray Dalio's idea of weaknesses. Most people, he says there are 4 things you can do with weaknesses. And this absolutely applies to what we're talking about here. So suppose you are ENTP, right? You can say that, okay, this is my weakness. Now, you know that this is your, okay, there is a weakness that you have. The most common thing that people do is that they evade their weakness. They run away from it. They refuse to acknowledge it. And that is always disastrous. The second thing you can do about your weakness is you can work with people who are strong at where you are weak. That, I think, is the most powerful thing. Third thing you can do is to improve where you're weak. And actually, working with people who are much stronger at you than you on that is the best way of doing the improvement, because your capability of doing improvement is limited by the fact that you don't even know where you are. So you may think that you've become twice as good, but you might have moved from 1% to 2%. By working with people who are really good at it, you know what like 70% looks like or 80% looks like. And fourth, you can structure your life so that your weaknesses don't hurt you as much. That too can be achieved by working with people who are strong at the things where you're weak. So that would be my answer. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Ray Dalio's principles are actually a really good example of this, because you have to acknowledge your weaknesses and then you can actually start to solve them. And anyway, but I was wondering about thinking about this in terms of the yogs. And then, how would you map the yogs on, and then how would those functions? So if this is, and tell me if this makes sense, the journey to the center, could that be related to a personality type? Like you can get to the center through various yogas, but is there a relationship between those two?
Sure, great question. So the beautiful thing is that this is actually a very powerful model. For those who are not familiar, we've studied Bhagavad Gita. We did about 100 meetups on Bhagavad Gita, and we went through it in great amount of detail. Bhagavad Gita holds that there are 4 paths to the center. So this is all about, Bhagavad Gita is talking about this, the center. This is your heart. That's where you're trying to go. And he says, and Indian philosophy holds that there are 4 paths. There is the green path, which is the path of action. It's called the karma yoga, by taking the right action. That is one yoga. The second yoga is called bhakti yoga. That means having devotion, truly valuing the center, the heart. Okay. Then there is the jnana yoga, which is the path of knowledge. There you're trying to understand the center. You understand the heart. And last is what is called the dhyana yoga. That is to keep your attention trained on the universal principle. So the insight, focus on that. And what Gita holds is that all of these 4 lead to the same place. So all of this, imagine this is your heart, and these 4 are going like this. You're going towards the core of your being in 4 different directions. And what it holds is that when you make progress on one, you make progress on the others too. Getting better and better at one of them will enable you to get better on the others. It also holds that people have different proclivities, different strengths. For some people, the Jnana Yoga, the blue path, is the most effective path. For some people, it's the red path, which is the most effective path. And Krishna in Bhagavad Gita says, follow the path that works for you and do it with everything you've gotten, everything you got. And if you do that, then you will reach the center. So there is, again, for each of these traditions of yogas, they respect all the other yogas and regard them as the path, different paths to the same thing. So there is a unity over here, which is exact. So this is a very good capturing of Bhagavad Gita as well. Right? Anybody else has any thoughts, any comments?
If the cognitive functions do exist, don't you think in a soulmate relationship or twin flame relationship, the strongest attraction would happen between people of completely opposite types, because then the one soul is complete, split in two different bodies.
Yeah, excellent point. Thank you, Fei Wu Ling. And I would request you to put an exclamation mark so we can have a great conversation. Next, so the point here is that there is the point of completion, something that completes you. This is true for both kind of relationships as well as, business relationships. And it's a very, very deep point. And the 8 functions and seeing what you're missing, like the other person provides something that you're missing, and there is a commonality, a very deep commonality. So it's like the combination of those two. But that's something that, we're not going to go into too much detail. There is a lot of work on that. But again, there is, the point is, the unity of individuals and this kind of like genuine, authentic relating to the other people, regarding other people as it's like yourself. And then realizing that dynamics between people is actually enormously complex, and definitely the part of completing and making you whole in some way is a very, very powerful, very, very powerful experience. Thank you. All right. Anybody else has any comments, any thoughts? We'll go with Andrea. Andrea, what do you think?
Yes, thank you. Great presentation. I was just thinking that this dynamic starts within yourself. So I think that Jung, in this sense, it was more like how these selves are in dynamic with each other and internally in ourselves. And I think that what I was thinking about, when there is more this imbalance in ourselves, there is this malfunctioning. And I was wondering if this is when we start having or seeing problems with personality disorders, for example, because it loses this internal balance. And then, of course, you cannot interact with others well if you're not interacting with ourselves first. Thank you.
Wonderful. Great point, Andrea. Absolutely. I think, Jordan Peterson does this a lot, of seeing, that it's really powerful to think of yourself as composed of these different people interacting. And are you how is your cast of people interacting within you? How well is it interacting? How well is it working as a family? And understanding it for yourself is core to actually dealing effectively with other people, because you can actually do that work. Now, in terms of personality disorders, etc., I have not really looked at that. I'm not, I've not really gone deep into that. So in terms of what can go wrong is not something that I've focused on. The thing that I have focused on, and what we have focused on in the various works that we are working on, like Bhagavad Gita or Gospel of John or Tao Te Ching, is how to achieve integration. And what are the various parts? It's to have the right attitude towards all your parts and your whole, to be able to bring it together. So my entire approach to this is trying to achieve integration. And I find that these three-dimensional things are very powerful because they never let you forget the unity. Okay. Now let me give you a more radical example of this. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. So far we've been looking at this, right? And you can see how it is like different areas. Now there is a more powerful version, because it's a simpler version of the same thing, and that is this. Again, think of this as your heart. This is a D4 dice. Okay, so let me see if I can bring it closer here. Okay, so this is a D4 dice, and it has, all these sides. And if you look at a D4 dice, okay, whatever is at the top is the focus that you have. Let's say you're looking at it like this, okay? What happens is that you're seeing, for example, let's say in case of ENTP, you're looking at one. The one is there at the top, okay? But you never lose the fact that there is 2 and 3 and 2 and 3 on each of the sides. So this is a very simple way of thinking about everything. It's the tetrahedral. The idea is to keep all the functions and relationships between functions with you at all times. So that's so I do have all these dice in my pockets so let me see if I can bring up all the 4. So you see here. So it's, I have these dice, which is, you can see that you can have like a yellow dice, blue dice, red dice, and green dice. And you can think about what are you focusing on at a given time. But at each point of time, each of the dice has all these other, the 1, 2. So I use the numbers to correspond to the functions. So I would put, I use 1 for N, that is intuition, 2 for thinking, 3 for feeling or valuing, and 4 for sensing or action. So you can think of the same thing, many of the same things that I'm thinking of, using this dice. But I do like this model because what it does is it makes the emphasis very clear. And by having all these 8 things, you can start thinking about the interactions in a much more robust way. All right. So that's what I had to say. So any closing thoughts about how it was, especially people who have not commented. What was it like? If you would like to share, you're welcome to do that before we close. We'll go with Evanik first. Evanik?
So for me, as someone that's new to Jung and his cognitive functions, what this provided is it made me want to study it out more, because I think not only could I learn more about myself, but I can learn more about myself and my interaction with other people, and learn about why I interact the way I interact with certain personalities. So I think there was a real value, especially for someone like me who has almost no experience with Jung other than what I studied with 52 Living Ideas. But I think the presentation that you gave, you showed the possibility. So again, excellent. And it was great to listen in and to listen to everybody's thoughts and to hear different perspectives from people who have a great familiarity with Jung to people who don't have as great of a familiarity with Jung. So it was very, very good. Thank you.
So I will say two things about it. I find that I get two things from working with cognitive functions. Number one, these are like scales that you can put against yourself. See, we have limited self-knowledge. We are aware, we are what we are, and we just go on. We are not that conscious about exactly what we are doing. By putting these against you, you are able to measure and see where you are on various things. So it gives you greater self-knowledge through understanding of functions, of saying, what am I actually doing? So that's, greater self-knowledge through measurement of these things is one. Second, you understand other people better. Because the tendency all of us have is to regard other people exactly like as if they were just like us. So if we are emotional and the other person is not emotional, you say, what's wrong? Why are they all not emotional at all? There must be something really wrong. But maybe there isn't. And what this does is that this actually shows you the various ways in which people can be. So I find that it's really useful to understand other people, because you suddenly stop. I mean, still you do, when a person is very different from you, it is still hard, but you actually know that, oh, they are operating like this. That's why we are having difficulty. And what that does is that all the anger and frustration goes away. And then you start working on how do we do that? They're going to come at it like this. I'm going to keep coming at it like this. How do we meet in the middle and somehow make it work? So it allows you to deal with people better. So those are the two primary benefits that I have found with this. All right, next up is Joe, followed by Brian. Joe.
Yeah, I think this is a really important presentation, because the way it relates to the Bucky series, more importantly, that it shows the practicality of Bucky's concepts and how that we can actually start to view things in multiple dimensions. And I mean, and the next year, that's what I think has to be one of our goals, is to, if we're going to bring Bucky to the masses, this is like kind of a way of doing it. It's taking geometry of thought and putting it on top of something already being used in like Jung's practical functions. It can also be used with various other things like organizational dynamics. It can be used in a lot of different ways. So I think that this session is really important as far as what we're doing with Bucky overall. And just understanding geometry of thought. I mean, this is very, very deep, and it also provides us with something to visual that when what we're missing. And for me, I mean, if you think about it, you start to think in multiple dimensions, you see what you're missing. And I think that that's that's one of the beauties of Bucky as well, looking at the whole and seeing everything, and kind of being able to assess, kind of bring the unconscious to the conscious. And I think that's what it really helps you do. So, and these visuals are extremely powerful. And especially being able to take visuals and to explain them, they're not easy. It's not easy. It's not an easy thing to do. So I very much appreciate the effort, but also even more, I appreciate the importance of what this session will hopefully lead to in other meetups, because maybe it might even inspire other people to take the initiative to talk about how the tetrahedron or the Merkaba, any of these concepts that Bucky talks about, and or tensegrity. There's several other ones that how these can be practically applied. I mean, I know Jung can pick up on these things pretty quickly, as she has in the past. But anyway, those are my comments. I mean, I really thought that this was fantastic, but I thought this was very important as well, because it's important not just to talk about geometry itself, just the application of it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. So I want to give another illustration here, because I'm using all these questions and comments to fill in more about how to use this. We are planning a giant series on Buckminster Fuller. Okay, Buckminster Fuller is one of these great Renaissance men who have all of these things going at full blast. And the problem we were trying to solve in designing the series, we're going to do this all year next year, every Sunday. So it's 52 meetups. So how do we do that? How do we design that so that it appeals to everybody, to all the functions? Okay, so this is how we came up with that. Bucky is like, actually, this is what 52 Living Ideas is like. We really care about insights. That's what we are about. There is a great deal of camaraderie that we have, very deep camaraderie that you can see in our meetups. We love ideas. And in terms of practicality, in terms of applying the ideas, that is left to individuals who are doing it outside of Zoom. It is difficult to do action inside Zoom. We've not yet figured out the technology to do that. So the question was, how do we design the meetups? Bucky is full of insights. So we have 4 meetups per month. So what we are doing is that we are going to have a yellow meetup, a red meetup, a blue meetup, and a green meetup, so that some of these are going to really appeal to some people, and people are going to start seeing connections between that. So what is the yellow week? The yellow week, we're going to do, the first week is going to be yellow week. And that's going to be actually looking at the insights of Bucky directly. So we're going to take a work by Bucky and look at his deepest insights and discuss it. Second, this is going to be the week 3. It's going to be community discussions of actually talking to each other and helping each other learn. There are going to be several people who have very deep expertise in Bucky, in the meetups. So there is going to be a lot of kind of community discussion. The next is blue. Some of these people who are experts in Bucky, who have spent like 20, 30, 40 years on Bucky's work, they are going to be talking about Bucky's ideas or their own ideas based on Bucky. We already have like 3 or 4 presentations lined up like this. And last, but not the least, is green. This is going to be design of actually seeing what Bucky's ideas look like in practice. So for example, my friend Rupali is going to be doing a meetup on the geodesic dome. So we will see what these things look like. And by doing this all together, we will have a much greater appreciation of Bucky. So coming back to the principle of integrity is like when Joe, not Joe, but CJ was talking about Bucky. He says, I asked him, give us something, give us your thoughts. And he came up with this idea of 4 on-ramps to synergetics, which is the thought of Bucky. So 4 entries into the thought of Bucky. And he says the first, I'm going to put it in this order. This one he calls integrities, of understanding the insights, the holistic nature of it. This one he calls collaboration for comprehensivity. This one he calls geometry, the core ideas, the mathematical ideas, the geometric ideas which are underlying Bucky's work. And this he calls design. And he says these are the 4 ways, 4 on-ramps for various people to get there. So this is very, this actually maps very well into that. So you can see that there are so many things that can map into this, So thank you. Next up is Brian.
So in listening to the further discussion, I do have a question for clarification.
Please.
I was struck at the beginning, but kind of took on board that the sensing also included acting. But now as I've listened to it more and more, I don't see how those necessarily are the same thing.
Right. So I would recommend, watching videos by Michael Pierce on all these functions. They do a fantastic job of showing, what these functions are. By necessity, I've had to kind of really make it very short, whatever I'm saying. So sensing is acting. So the sensing function that Jung uses, when you look at people who are very good at extroverted sensing, these are athletes. So it's not just sitting, taking in the senses, but it is actually acting while taking in the senses. So it is your physical action. So at the level, so you can think about this as these 4 things as action, thought, feeling, and intuition. So those, actually these 3 categories of, cognition, behavior, and emotion, those are there in the cognitive behavioral therapy, for example. There are many, many, many systems which have these 3 elements. The 4th element, I think, is the one which really brings all of these other together. And that's the intuition of having seen the oneness in everything. So I would say that. But I encourage you to look at, Michael Pierce's videos, which does a fantastic job of describing each of them. Because I'm trying to cover a very large area, I was not able to go into detail with all of this. What Michael Pierce will have is that he will have actually many, 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 many visual examples of what it looks like, what good SE looks like. So that's what I would start with. All right,
Thank
folks. Go ahead, Brian. You were saying something?
I'm just saying thank you for that.
Okay, wonderful. So there are many videos. Let me see. The best thing is that if you can go to 52 Living Ideas and go to the playlist for Carl Jung, that's where you will find all of them. You will find, Michael Pierce has come here. I mean, it's really amazing. Okay, what is out there, what we have on our channel. So the thing I would recommend is the following. Start with the presentation of Richard Owen on John Beebe's 8-function model. That is the most concise presentation that I have seen anywhere on the internet on all these 8 functions and how they interact together. It's just a brilliant, brilliant presentation. That's number one. Number two, Michael Pierce has written a beautiful book called Motes and Beams. The Motes and Beams is the reference in Bible where you actually see the motes in the eyes of other people, anything that is little wrong in their eyes, but you don't see the beams in your own eyes. So it's like, it's this difference between how we are focused on our dominant functions, the first two functions mostly, dominant and the navigation function, and don't really see what is going on with other people. But that's just the title. Again, Michael Pierce's book is a fantastic example of, it's a primer. So if you want two primers, one is this Richard Owen video, which is, I think his presentation is about 1.5 hours or so. It's a beautiful summary of it. And I think that the interview I did with Michael Pierce, it was 2 interviews, is also a great summary, because his book, Motes and Beams, does a good job of doing that. And what I did was that I broke it up into kind of the core principles he was talking about, and we went through it one by one systematically. So those two are really the best resources that I would recommend to get started with. Evanik?
Sure, something connected when you talked about the Bible verse about the beam being in your own eye, and I have it up, so I'm just going to read it.
Please.
If you don't mind.
Please.
So it says, how can you think of saying, friend, let me help you get rid of that speck in your eye when you can't see past the log in your own eye? Hypocrite. First, get rid of the log in your own eye, then you will see well enough to deal with the speck in your friend's eye. And I think this is so true. And I never saw the connection between it, but it is like, figure yourself out first. Like, I think Jordan Peterson talks about sorting your own self out. Sort yourself out first. Then you can truly help your friends sort themselves out. And you can help them from a place of compassion rather than just trying to fix them. So I thought that connection was just beautiful. So thank you for that.
Wonderful. So I want to show you this. Folks, I love talking about this. So feel free to ask, make any comments and go back and forth. I'm happy to do that for as long as people have questions. I want to apply this to Gospel of John that we are studying. Okay, the thing that really separates Gospel of John, Bhagavad Gita, and Tao Te Ching together as one unit from the modern times is this integration. We saw in Bhagavad Gita how these different 4 yogas lead to the oneness that is at the core of your being, at the core of the universe. That's what Bhagavad Gita approaches. Now let's look at the Gospel of John. This is God the Father. This is your intuition about what is. You can't see it directly, but this is God the Father. This is that function in you. This is the word. This is explication of it. This is the wisdom of it. This is the word. So it starts, one of the deepest things there is God so loved the world. Okay, so it is through the word that everything was made. So there is a connection between this and this. And what is the core message of Gospel of John? And it is this, that you need to love this, through this, by doing this. So what the power of Gospel of John is that what Jesus is something like, is this. It's a model, it's a prototype, it's a full human. It is fully human and fully divine at the same time. So it is the self. It is a portrayal of the self at its best. It is prototype for you to follow. And it has all these examples. I called it in one of the presentations, the diamond. So it is around the light, but it actually is the intermediary. It is through the words and through the example of actions and through the demonstration of love, intense love, which is willing to do anything. That is showing you this. But you can see it is when you look at any particular part of the gospel, you have all these 4 elements active in. And Gospel of John is really the best example of this. In the Bible, I have not seen anything else, because it is simply focused on saying, what is Jesus? And this entire nature of all these aspects is present in almost every sentence in the whole thing. So it's just pretty incredible. All right. Anybody else wants to say anything? Okay, so I'm going to tell you about what's coming up. We're doing an amazing meetup on Buckminster Fuller this Sunday. It's going to be on comprehensivity of Buckminster Fuller. So that's on Sunday. Hope you can make it Sunday at 9 p.m. Eastern time. And just honored to have you folks here. Great questions. And I thought it worked out better than I had hoped. So thank you very much. Take care, everybody. Good night.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Good night.